Imagine deep inside each of us, there is some chamber, a place where the richest treasures of our lives, gathered from our ongoing searches for truth and meaning, are kept. In this place are the things we cherish, know as sacred, orient our lives around, are brokenhearted when others and we ourselves and the world betrays them. Some of the things put in these chambers when we are young by those who want to start us off with a little orientation is treasure bequeathed out of generosity and care from our families, sometimes through the culture we enter into. It can get there in a lot of ways, but often there comes a time when we take these things out and we examine them for ourselves. We put some back in, leave others behind. That process, I think, is the core of spiritual maturation, the claiming ultimately of what is in this chamber of sacred truths and treasures for ourselves. God, some notion of God, is often there in some form, particularly in the West, at least in what we inherit, and our sense of a relationship to that purported reality, too. The set of sermons that Reverend Shenham and I have done on reimagining God is in part about what happens when many of us decide that the notions we inherited fall short. Exploring then whether there is some other notion of God that makes sense for us to put back in its place, or whether we abandon the God project altogether. Today, in this short and incomplete tour of the answers and the possible reimagination we might do, I wanted to talk a little bit about what can be put here under the label of agnosticism. The Pew Research Center has twice conducted surveys of the religious landscape of America. They've conducted similar other kinds of surveys, but in 2014, they interviewed 35,000 Americans over 50 states, all 50, and found that 4% were agnostic, 3.1% were atheist. Unitarians, in case you were wondering, were far less than 1%. Atheists, most simply understood, are those who say that they do not believe in a God, however they define that word and reality. Often when asked, folks who are atheists will say that they have come to this commitment either because they believe there is no evidence for God, and because they see a lot of evidence to the contrary. Horrific natural disasters, senseless suffering, human tragedy, loss, and evil. However they come to it, atheists are certain there is no God, nothing they would name that way or know that way. Agnostics, most simply put, are those who say they don't know. And often will add that they don't think we can know if there is a God. Like Thoreau, who, when asked on his deathbed if he believed there was a life after this one, replied he was taking it one life at a time, agnostics might reply similarly. Unable to know, they table the topic. They hold it lightly. They live this life as they can see best to. 83% of those who said they were agnostic also answered that they are clear there is a right and a wrong, but it depends on circumstances. And half of those surveyed say they use common sense when they're navigating moral and ethical decision-making. These two groups, atheists and agnostics, are most represented among the younger generations. And when grouped with those who say they are religiously unaffiliated and unwilling to claim any label, the nuns, as they are often called, this is increasingly the fastest growing cohort of religious folks in the US and maybe Europe. I have a lot of sympathy with agnosticism. To be fair, it is not a new idea in the religious landscape. The idea that our ability to know definitively about God is highly constrained and suspect. As it says in the I Ching, God and the devil are both human constructions. That an acknowledgement that how we define the concept of God has always been a human creation conditioned by human limitations. That acknowledgement is as ancient as the concept of God and the attempt to define God itself. You might be interested to know that even in the Bible, 1 John 4, it says, "No one has ever seen the face of God." Our efforts to define this thing we call God have certainly met, too, with some horrific failures. Martin Buber, famous for his commandment to I-thou relationships, once rightly observed that God is the most heavy-laden of all human words. None has become so soiled, so mutilated. Even so, Buber and others have refused to let this God project go. Gordon Kaufman, a theologian who taught at Harvard Divinity School, acknowledged in his book, In Face of Mystery, that the question we most have to wrestle with, the real question, isn't whether human notions of God have often been evil or absurd in their construction. The answer to that is a clear yes. The question we have before us is whether there is something that looks godlike out there. Quote, "Some extra-human reality," he writes, "in relationship to which human existence gains its being and its fulfillment, some ultimate point of reference in terms of which our human life and its problems and possibilities must be understood." And how would we know that? This is the mushy, messy business that agnostics get queasy over. A friend of mine, Nadim Hussain, who became a professor of philosophy, gave a lecture about God, and one of Nadim's points, as I recall it, was that the quality of data we have in any investigation always conditions the certainty we can claim about our conclusions. So, double-blind research with large sample groups of participants, for instance, can claim more potential certainty in their results than chatting with a few friends over dinner, right? Kaufman gets this. He writes, "If God were an object, or reality directly and immediately apparent for all to see and recognize, no such quest or question, the whether there is this ultimate reality or God, no such quest or question would be required. The issue arises because God, taken by religious faith to be the most important reality to human existence, is also in many respects the most hidden from us." That's important, right? Since my friend, the philosopher, is correct, the level of certainty that we can claim about something has to be contingent on the ways in which we come to make our assertions, and no one has seen the face of God. So how do we know what we think and know about God, we human beings? Well, we can't say that we know God because of what texts or teachings have said, those that we've inherited. Because that line of knowing that's sometimes cited, that would only be true if we knew there was some unerring line of transmission from the one who experienced God or who was God incarnate and dictated these truths through all the human generations of religious leaders into whose care these texts have been given. But that would make that argument what philosophers call a tautology, which is where you assume the thing you are trying to prove in the arguing for it. Stay with me. Because the only thing that could ensure an unerring line of transmission of a text would be a God who protected and watched over that transmission of the text. So you would have assumed the God and some qualities of the God that you are seeking to talk about how you know about in order to validate the texts that teach about such a God. Does that make sense? Okay, so texts are not the way we know about God, not if we're honest. You and I might base what we think we know about God because of or informed by some inherited tradition or text. But the proof of that tradition, the test that it has to pass through and against, is our own experience, I think, of the world, our own experience in particular of the transcendent breaking through and present to us, I think. That is to say, we base our notion of God on our experience of what we would call God or God-adjacent experiences, to throw it a little wider. History, of course, has had scores of such experiences recorded and unrecorded. From the founders of all the major religious traditions and spiritual communities to my own grandmother, and I'm sure many of you have your own, I would guess. People through time have had any number of moments that felt different, transcendent, transformative, powerful, with clarity and connection that they would call something divine, something numinous, to use that beautiful word, mysterious, experiences they would call religious. William James wrote a whole book about it called The Varieties of Religious Experience. And one characteristic of those experiences is that folks often feel in their core, without a doubt or with minimal doubts, that those moments were existentially, undeniably important and real. Yet, not everyone has had these, and they're not scientifically repeatable. And these moments of powerful connection and insight and knowing are almost always fleeting and limited in the message or knowing that we can take away from them. Paul Tillich, theologian, in a beautiful sermon of his about grace, experienced the knowing of you are accepted in one of those moments. I'm reading King's, the new biography of King by Jonathan Egg, where it tells again that pivotal moment where King is caught in fear and threat during the Montgomery bus boycotts and has a moment that changes him in which he knows and hears, I will be with you always. What we know after such moments, what people report after such moments, is powerful and limited. What we don't know after them is vast. We don't really know what or whom we're talking to, though it feels transcendent and important. We don't know much about what it wants and thinks beyond the little it has handed us. We get a glimpse of something that we think it can feel appropriate to call the thing people have put under the umbrella of God. We have a sense, maybe, that if we could know more, we would live our lives in connected and in service and trying to be aligned with this, but it passes. And these moments are strong, but they're often few and far between. Like a Zen cone, they point us to something beyond what we can know in the normal ways of knowing, and then they leave. So one reason I actually love and am drawn to Unitarian Universalism, to the plurality, the religious plurality that we put under an umbrella of our joint searches for truth and meaning and service, is that we get to sit together and have conversations among people who can have vastly different experiences of the religious life and the spiritual life and how they make meaning together. And we can put the pieces together and hold them all. Like the story of the blindfolded people who each have a handful of the elephant, that famous religious story, and each thinks they know what it is. It's like parchment, it's like the trunk of a tree, says the one with the leg. It's like a rope, says the one with the tail. But in the parable, what they have their hands on is so vast and strange that they only even have a chance of understanding it when they're in conversation. That's what we get. And we get permission to have those conversations, not pretend that we adhere to some creedal, unified sense of what we have our hands on that's so astounding or confusing. Even so, ultimately, the agnostic and my friend the philosopher have such an important caution. Our information so fleeting, so partial, so mysterious, so limited, that we can only assert what we know in and about these moments with deep humility. Because as Gordon Kaufman wrote, this thing some of us sense to be the most important reality of human existence is also in many respects most hidden from us. And in the end, we'll walk away often left with mystery, a fundamentally unknowable thing. That's why I am a theist and an agnostic. I've had powerful, what I would call religious experiences of very different kinds for me that made true to me that there is something, I think, powerful and wise and loving that has felt very personally connected to me at times, and I only have very limited sense of what it is or how it works in the universe. And so I could wonder about this for my whole life, and I will. And in the meantime, in the face of mystery, what? I think in the face of mystery, this. I think we keep our eyes and our hearts open. I think we listen with real curiosity to the religious and spiritual experiences and intellectual insights of others about these most important questions of our lives. I think we engage in practices of opening, journaling, prayer, meditation, creation of art, whatever it is that for us throws the doors of our spirits open, should this mysterious presence want to walk past and leave its perfume in our room once more. And as the agnostics apparently do, according to Pew, I think in the meantime, we try and make good moral choices based largely on common sense and the inherited wisdom from poets and scientists and prophets and thoughtful people through time that resonates with us as true. And we just try and ease the tide of human suffering, because that alone we know we need to do, and that alone is a lifetime of work. Someday, my friends, some distant day for all of us, because I love you all and I want you all around as long as possible, some distant day, the blindfold on all of us will be removed. And we will know the answers to questions, some of our deepest questions, most confounding ones, like the one in front of us in today's sermon. And meanwhile, you and I, we live in this life that is rife with possibilities and wild unknowns. Meanwhile, we gather what sacred knowledge and cherished commitments we can, and we store them in the deepest chambers of our hearts and minds, and we serve them with our lives, but always reminded to live with deepest humility and open to mystery. So may it be. Amen.